The old leather toolbox sat between them like a sacred treasure, its cracked surface worn smooth in places from years of use. Inside, the tools rested in perfect order, each handle polished by countless hours in their father's hands. Now, those same tools rested in the smaller, oil-stained fingers of Emma and Olivia Parker. The two 9-year-olds sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor, their identical dark braids brushing their shoulders as they leaned over the dismantled toaster. In front of them, 3/16 Phillips, Emma murmured without looking up. Her voice was calm, certain, the way someone 3 times her age might speak when completely in their element. She held out her hand, palm up, expectantly. Olivia's own small fingers dipped into the toolbox, brushing over wrenches, pliers, and a roll of electrical tape before finding the right screwdriver. She handed it over without a word, her head tilting as she adjusted the flashlight so its beam landed directly on the stubborn, heating element. Got it. The smell of metal and old crumbs hung in the air, warmed by the faint tang of dust on heated coils. The kitchen was small, barely enough space for the 3 of them to move around without bumping into the table. But it was alive with focus. Their grandmother, Susan Winters, leaned in the doorway, arms folded across her chest. As she watched them, her uniform, a simple navy cleaner's shirt, smelled faintly of soap and disinfectant after a long morning shift at Westfield Airfield. Mrs. Jenkins, their neighbor from 2 floors down, sat at the table wringing her hands, her eyes darting between the girls and the scattered pieces of her old toaster. I know it's not worth much, she told Susan earlier, but Harold gave it to me for our wedding 40 years ago. I just can't throw it away. Susan had started to refuse. She knew how precious the twins' energy was. But Emma had already knelt on the floor, rolling up her sleeves, and Olivia had quietly fetched the toolbox. You're both so much like your father, Susan whispered now, almost without realizing she'd spoken aloud. Both girls paused for a moment, their eyes meeting briefly over the toaster's open shell. Neither spoke, but in that shared glance there was the ghost of a memory. Strong hands guiding theirs over the insides of a small engine, a warm laugh in the background, the sound of metal against metal. Captain James Parker had been gone for 5 years now, killed in Afghanistan when the girls were barely 4. The world might have thought that was too young to remember, but they carried him everywhere. In the way they worked, the way they problem solved, the way they moved. In silent unison, with a small twist of her wrist, Emma freed the heating element and held it up triumphantly. Olivia leaned in, reattaching the wires with careful precision, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. Moments later, the toaster was reassembled. They plugged it in, and the faint red glow of the coils filled the room, painting their identical faces with soft light. Mrs. Jenkins clapped her hands to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Oh, bless you, girls, she said, her voice breaking as the neighbor left, cradling the toaster like it was gold. Susan sat at the table and pulled a small pile of bills toward her, her brow furrowed as she tallied rent, groceries, school supplies, and the looming medical bills she had yet to pay. She had raised these girls alone since the day her son-in-law's folded flag was delivered to their door. Their mother had already been gone for years by then. Every choice Susan made since had been about protecting them, even if it meant living quietly, invisibly, on the edge of what they could afford. The girls patted over, still smelling faintly of oil and warm metal. Emma held up one of their father's old maintenance manuals. Grandma, can we bring Dad's journals to work tomorrow? We still have to finish the diagrams. Susan hesitated, then nodded. Just stay where I can see you. Mr. Collins doesn't like children in the hangars. That night, after the twins were asleep in their shared bed, Susan stood in the doorway watching them. The glow from the streetlight outside traced their faces, so like James it almost hurt to look at them. She whispered into the quiet, "You're extraordinary, both of you. But I'm afraid of what will happen when the world finds out just how special you are." She didn't know that tomorrow, the world would begin to find out, and it would start with the sound of a plane in trouble. The morning broke crisp and golden, sunlight spilling over the rooftops like liquid fire. But there was a restless energy in the air that Susan couldn't quite place. She guided the twins through the staff entrance of Westfield Airfield, her pace brisk, her ID badge swinging from its worn lanyard. The smell of jet fuel drifted faintly on the breeze, mingling with the metallic tang of machine oil. For the girls, the airfield was a wonder, a place where gleaming wings caught the light like silver birds, and the low growl of engines hummed through the air like an untamed heartbeat. Remember the rules, Susan said, crouching to meet their eyes. Stay in the lounge. Do your schoolwork. And no wandering. Emma and Olivia nodded in perfect synchronization. But there was a spark in their matching brown eyes that Susan knew all too well. It was the same spark she'd seen in James the day he told her he was enlisting, a quiet, stubborn determination that once ignited was almost impossible to extinguish. They took their seats in the far corner of the maintenance office. Notebooks open, pencils in hand, their father's worn journal tucked discreetly inside Emma's backpack. The office smelled of coffee and grease, its large windows giving them a clear view of the tarmac. They pretended to focus on fractions, but their gaze kept drifting to the expanse beyond the glass. It began as a shimmer in the distance, the sleek outline of a Gulfstream G650 cutting through the morning sky. Emma noticed first. That approach is too steep, she murmured. Olivia glanced up. Even to her young eyes, something was wrong. The aircraft's descent wasn't smooth, but tense, as if it were being coaxed down by sheer willpower. Then the radio crackled to life, the voice tight but controlled. Westfield Tower. November 775 Whiskey Bravo requesting emergency landing. Experiencing unusual engine fluctuations, Emma and Olivia froze, their hearts quickening. They'd spent hours with their father's manuals, memorizing diagrams and fault codes, listening to him explain how a pilot reads the language of a machine. They knew what they were hearing wasn't just routine. The jet touched down, its wheels kissing the runway harder than usual, the brakes squealing faintly. Ground crews rushed to meet it, towing it toward the largest hangar. The twins leaned forward, pressing their small hands against the glass as a tall man in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit emerged from the cabin. His expression was a mask, composed, authoritative, but edged with irritation. That's William Blackwood. A passing mechanic whispered to another, the billionaire. Marcus is already calling for parts from Europe. The name meant nothing to the girls, but the problem with the jet did. Emma reached for her bag, flipping open her father's journal to a page marked with a crease so deep it was nearly torn. She jabbed a finger at a diagram of the Pratt and Whitney PW800 series engine. Listen, she whispered to Olivia. Dad wrote about a calibration issue that isn't mechanical. If the wrong firmware versions try to run together, the system fights itself. Olivia finished, her eyes widening. That's exactly what he described. Outside, they could see a huddle of mechanics working under the open engine panels. A man with salt-tan pepper hair, Marcus, presumably, gestured sharply toward the diagnostic screen, his movements clipped and frustrated. From where the twins sat, they could just make out the flicker of error codes on a nearby monitor. And they recognized them. They're looking in the wrong place, Olivia breathed. Before Emma could answer, the office door swung open. Susan stepped inside, flushed from cleaning the executive lounge. Girls, I told you to stay put. Grandma, Emma said urgently, we know. What's wrong with that plane? Susan's face darkened. This isn't like fixing Mrs. Jenkins' toaster. These are professionals, and that is a multi-million-dollar aircraft. But Dad's notes, no. Susan's voice was sharp now, but beneath it was something else. A shadow of fear. We don't draw attention to ourselves. Do you understand? Not here. The twins exchanged a glance. Susan didn't see it, but they understood each other perfectly. Rules or no rules, the problem wasn't going to fix itself outside. Marcus threw his clipboard down in frustration. Mechanics began dispersing for lunch, their heads low. The hangar, for the first time all morning, was nearly empty. Emma's hand slid into her backpack. She felt the rough, familiar edge of the folded diagram, the one her father had annotated with 3 firm strokes of his pen. She looked at Olivia. Now, Emma said quietly. Olivia hesitated, glancing toward the hallway where their grandmother had disappeared. Dad would have helped, she murmured. That was all it took. They rose from their chairs and slipped through the side door, the hum of the hangar growing louder with each step. The jet loomed before them, silver and immense, its engines exposed like the beating heart of some giant creature. The scent of fuel and warm metal filled their lungs. Somewhere in the corner, the diagnostic computers still flashed those same error codes, stubborn, persistent, waiting for someone to understand what they were trying to say. And the small voices, armed with the knowledge of a man they loved more than anyone, were ready to listen. Would you like me to continue directly into part 3 so the tension flows without breaking the pace? Marcus was bent over the diagnostics console when he heard the sound of small footsteps echoing against the hangar's concrete floor. At first, He thought it was a junior tech returning early from lunch, but when he turned, he froze, standing. Just a few feet away were two identical little girls in denim overalls, braids hanging over their shoulders, their small shoes dusted with grit from the tarmac. What the? His voice came out sharper than intended. Who let you in here? Emma stepped forward before Olivia could answer, her hand tied around a folded sheet of paper. It's not the calibration assembly, she said quickly, her voice steady but urgent. It's a firmware conflict. Marcus blinked, thrown off by the confidence in her tone. Excuse me? Olivia held up their drawing, an exact replica of the PW800's diagnostic system, annotated with neat, tiny handwriting in the margins. We've been watching all morning, she explained. Your tests aren't finding it because the system's trying to run the firmware versions at once. They're fighting each other. For a moment, Marcus just stared. In 20 years of working on engines, he'd had plenty of civilians try to offer help, but this was different. The diagram was meticulous, every wire, every connection. Point was marked exactly. Whoever had drawn this knew the heart of the machine. Who taught you this? He asked, the skepticism in his voice softening into something else, curiosity, maybe even respect. Our dad, Emma said, Captain James Parker. He was a helicopter mechanic in Afghanistan. Marcus's eyes flickered with recognition. He had heard that name before, years back, though the memory was faint. Still, he wasn't in the mood for sentimentality. Mr. Blackwood's patience was running thin, and they needed a fix. You realize if you're wrong, I'm wasting precious time. You're not wrong if you're fixing the wrong thing, Emma countered without missing a beat. There was a pause, the kind where decisions are made in silence. Then Marcus exhaled slowly, motioning them toward the console. Show me. Emma handed over the diagram. Marcus followed the sequence exactly as their father had described, forcing protocol dominance. They called it a manual override to make the primary system take full control and ignore the conflicting firmware. His fingers moved over the keys, and for a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the error codes flickered, disappeared, and were replaced by a clean, stable readout. Marcus stared at the screen. No way. He ran another diagnostic, then another, each coming back clean. The engines, still open to the cool air of the hangar, were ready to start again before he could say more. The heavy doors at the far end rolled open, and William Blackwood strode in. The man's presence was like a shift in the weather, sharp, commanding, every step purposeful. His gaze went straight to Marcus. Tell me you have something, he said, his voice clipped. Marcus hesitated, then gestured to the twins. We do. Thanks to them. Blackwood's eyes landed on Emma and Olivia, taking in their oil-stained fingers and identical braids. His expression didn't change, but there was a faint crease of disbelief at the corner of his mouth. Children, he said, as if the word itself was out of place here. Emma didn't flinch. We learned from our dad's journals. Blackwood's brow lifted slightly. And who was your father? Olivia straightened, her chin lifting. Captain James Parker, sir. The effect was instantaneous. It was as if the air itself thickened. Blackwood stopped mid-breath, his face draining of color. His hand drifted to the edge of the workbench, gripping it hard enough for his knuckles. The pale James Parker, he said slowly, his voice low, almost reverent. His eyes moved between the girls, studying their faces as though trying to match them to a memory. My God, you're his daughters. Marcus glanced between them, startled at his employer's reaction. He had seen Blackwood in boardrooms, under fire in negotiations, facing multi-million-dollar crises without a flicker of emotion, but now, the man looked unsteady, as though someone had reached into his chest and twisted something he long buried. I searched for your family for years, Blackwood said finally, his voice carrying something far heavier than surprise. And I never found you. Emma's hand tightened protectively around her father's journal. She didn't understand why this stranger's voice carried both grief and guilt when he said her father's name, but she knew instinctively that something important had just cracked open. At that exact moment, Susan burst through the side door, breathless and tense. Girls, what are you? Her eyes landed on Blackwood, and she froze, her face blanching in a way Emma had never seen before. Blackwood's gaze slid from the twins to Susan, and recognition flared instantly. His tone shifted, quiet but weighted. Susan Winters, he said, you've been hiding them all this time. That was when Emma knew this wasn't just about a broken plane anymore. Something far bigger and far more dangerous had just begun. Do you want me to go straight and apart for so we keep the suspense rolling without breaking momentum? The hangar seemed to shrink around them, the hum of tools and distant engine tests fading beneath the weight of whatever was passing. Between William Blackwood and Susan Winters, for a long moment, nobody moved. Marcus stood frozen by the console. The twins stood shoulder to shoulder like the wary shadows, and Blackwood's gaze never left their grandmother's face. Susan's voice, when it came, was taut. "Mr. Blackwood, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," he interrupted, his tone low but unyielding. "You've been using your maiden name. That's why I couldn't find you. That's why." He stopped himself, his jaw tightening, as if catching words he wasn't ready to let out. Emma's pulse thudded in her ears. She glanced at Olivia, who was watching with wide, unblinking eyes, their grandmother's hands, usually steady even when scrubbing oil stains from hangar floors, were trembling. "I need to speak to you privately," Blackwood said, his voice clipped now. It wasn't a suggestion. "In my office." Now, Susan stiffened. "The girls, Marcus will watch them," Blackwood said without looking away. "And after what they just did from my jet, I think they've earned a tour." Emma's eyes flickered with curiosity despite the tension. Olivia looked torn, glancing between their grandmother and the man whose presence seemed to change the air itself. Susan hesitated, then gave a short nod. "1 hour," she said firmly to Marcus, her tone carrying a warning. She turned to the girls, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Stay here. Don't wander. I'll be back soon." Blackwood led Susan out of the hangar, his stride long and purposeful. As they crossed the tarmac toward the executive wing, Emma caught a glimpse of his face in profile, sharp lines, but shadowed by something that wasn't just business. Inside the hangar, Marcus turned to the twins. "All right," he said, trying to inject some levity. "You've seen the outside. Let me show you the inside." He led them up the stairs into the gleaming cabin of the Gulfstream. Plush cream leather seats lined the aisle, the air scented faintly with expensive cologne and new carpet. Olivia trailed her fingers over the stitching on the armrests, while Emma peered into the cockpit, her eyes lighting up at the tangle of dials and displays. "Most people look at these and see chaos," Marcus said, stepping into the cockpit. Beside her, your dad. He would have seen a story, every readout, every flicker of a gauge. "It's the machine talking to you." Emma smiled faintly. "That's what he used to say. That machines speak their own language." Down the hall, behind a heavy oak door in the executive wing, Susan stood rigidly before Blackwood's desk. He didn't sit. Instead, he braced his hands on the polished surface and leaned forward. "Why, Susan?" His voice was quieter now, but every syllable carried steel. "Why did you vanish? Why take them away?" Susan's lips pressed into a thin line. "Because I knew what would happen if certain people found them. If they knew whose daughters they were. James wanted them safe, not dragged into whatever this is." "This isn't about business," Blackwood said, his voice tightening. "It's about a promise. One I made to him." Her eyes narrowed. "A promise to a dead man can be twisted 100 ways to suit the living." Blackwood flinched, but only slightly. "You think I don't know what his death cost? You think I didn't?" He cut himself off again, pacing toward the window. The air between them bristled with unfinished sentences. Back in the cockpit, Olivia had slid into the co-pilot's seat, running her fingers lightly over the controls. "Grandma's not gonna like this," she murmured. Emma, staring at the horizon through the windshield, shook her head slowly. "I don't think it matters anymore." Somewhere beyond the walls of the hangar, in that office where voices had lowered but tension had risen, their grandmother's carefully guarded world was beginning to crack, and through that crack, the truth, whatever it was starting to slip through. "Would you like me to move right into part 5 so the emotional tension between Blackwood and Susan explodes into the next big reveal?" Blackwood's office was a world away from the clamor of the hangar. Thick carpet muted every step. The air held the faint scent of aged leather and something sharper, like cedar and smoke. Wide windows looked out over the airfield, where the silver Gulfstream sat under the sun like a sleeping predator. Susan remained standing, her back straight, hands clasped tightly in front of her as if letting them go would unravel her composure entirely. Blackwood didn't sit either. He paced once, slowly, his eyes never leaving her. 5 years, Susan. 5 years I searched for them, for you, for any trace. And now I find out you've been cleaning floors to hangars away. His tone wasn't loud, but it had weight. The kind that came from years of expecting answers and always getting them. You were never meant to find them, Susan replied, her voice flat, but her pulse drumming in her throat. That was the point. Blackwood stopped mid-step. Why? Because of me. Because of what I represent. Because of what they would represent if anyone knew. She shot back. To little girls who carry his name, his skill, his blood. James wasn't just a mechanic, and you know it. He didn't die in some ordinary skirmish, did he? The air between them tightened. Blackwood looked away, jaw locked, as though he were weighing whether to speak. Finally, he said, "No." He didn't. Susan's grip on her hands tightened until her knuckles whitened. "Then you know why I had to disappear. Those girls deserve to grow up free from that shadow, not dragged into the politics, the corporate vultures, and whatever else you're tangled in." "This isn't about vultures, Susan," Blackwood said, stepping closer, his voice low and deliberate. "It's about a debt, one I've carried every day since Afghanistan. Your son-in-law," his voice hitched just slightly, "saved my life, and not in some fleeting, lucky way. He made a choice. He put himself in the line of fire for me, took the hit that was meant for my head." Susan's breath caught. She had imagined countless versions of her son-in-law's last moments, but never with Blackwood's face in the picture. Blackwood's eyes hardened, but there was something else beneath, something raw. Before he was gone, I made him a promise. He told me, "If you want to repay me, don't give me medals or money. Find my girls someday. Make sure they have the life I can't give them. I've been looking for them ever since." Susan shook her head. "And if I told you that life isn't in a penthouse or on the deck of a yacht, that the life he'd want for them is one where they can breathe, where no one knows their last name the way you know it." For a moment, they simply stared at each other, to people holding pieces of the same man's legacy, neither willing to let go. Meanwhile, in the hangar, Marcus watched Emma and Olivia like a hawk. They were crouched beside one of the open engine panels, their small hands nowhere near the delicate machinery, but their eyes tracking every bolt, every cable with quiet hunger. "You two," Marcus said with a reluctant smile, "are trouble waiting to happen." "Dad used to say the same thing," Olivia replied softly. Emma glanced toward the distant executive wing, where she could just make out a corner of the glass window that belonged to Blackwood's office. She didn't know what was being said in there, but she felt it, a kind of pressure, like the moment before a storm breaks inside. Blackwood moved behind his desk at last. He opened the top drawer, pulled something out, and placed it carefully on the polished wood. It was a sealed, weathered envelope, edges slightly curled with age. On the front, in bold, steady handwriting, were the words for Emma and Olivia. "When they are ready." Susan stared at it as if it might burn her fingers. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. "He gave it to me the night before his last mission," Blackwood said. "Told me I'd know when to give it to them." His gaze lifted, steady on hers. "Susan, I think that time is now." Her throat tightened. "You don't know what opening that will do." "Yes," Blackwood said quietly, "I do." And in that charged silence, the sound of a distant engine starting up carried through the glass, rumbling like a warning. "If you want, I can take us straight into part 6, where the envelope's truth cracks everything open, and the stakes jump from personal to life-changing. That's where the suspense and emotion will start to fuse into the final reveal. Do you want me to?" The envelope sat between them like a live wire, small enough to slip into a pocket, heavy enough to tilt the entire room. Susan didn't move toward it. Her eyes stayed locked on the familiar handwriting, as if by not touching it she could somehow hold back whatever truth it carried. Blackwood didn't rush her. He leaned back against the edge of his desk, arms folded, the set of his shoulders betraying a tension he wasn't about to name. "Susan, I've been holding on to that for half a decade. I've turned it over in my hands more times than I can count, wondering if I'd ever get the chance to keep my word to him. Now here you are. Here they are. You can't expect me to walk away again." Susan's reply was slow, deliberate. "I expect you to remember why I stayed hidden. James didn't die so that his girls could become pawns in a life they never asked for. Whatever's in that envelope, I'm afraid it could bind them to you, to your world, in ways they'll never escape. And maybe," Blackwood said, his voice sharpening, "it could free them from a life where their grandmother has to scrub floors to keep the lights on." That struck deep, but Susan didn't flinch. "I'd scrub floors 1,000 years if it meant keeping them safe." For a moment, there was only the hum of the air conditioning, the faint buzz of a distant intercom. Then Blackwood pushed the envelope toward her. You decide. But know this, James didn't write those words lightly. He meant for them to be heard, not buried. Through the office's glass wall, the runway shimmered in the heat haze. Out on the tarmac, the Gulf Stream gleamed under the sun, and in its shadow, two small figures stood with Marcus. Emma and Olivia were at the nose of the aircraft. Marcus explaining the radar system, but their attention kept drifting toward the executive wing. They could sense something was unfolding, not just a conversation, but a fault line deep under their lives beginning to shift in the cockpit. Olivia had been allowed into the pilot's seat. She ran her fingers over the worn leather of the yoke, whispering under her breath the pre-flight checks she'd memorized from their father's journals. Emma, in the co-pilot's chair, stared out the windshield. Do you think Grandma's mad at us for coming in here? She asked softly. I think she's worried, Olivia said. And I think that man, the one in the suit, knows something about Dad. Emma turned, eyes narrowing. You could tell too. Olivia nodded. He looked at us like he'd seen us before. Back in the office, Susan finally reached for the envelope. Her fingers brushed the rough paper. The faint ridge where the flap had been sealed all those years ago. She didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, she looked up at Blackwood. If I do this, and it changes everything, you don't get to walk away. You don't get to disappear when things get hard. I wouldn't, he said without hesitation. Not from them, not from anything tied to James. There was something in his tone, not just resolve, but an old, unhealed wound. Susan recognized it because she carried her own. She slipped the envelope into her bag. They're young, she said, but when the time comes, I'll let them read it, with me there, and you. It was a surrender. It was a truce, fragile and temporary. Outside, the roar of another jet, taking off, shuddered through the windows, rattling a picture frame on Blackwood's wall. Neither of them noticed that Marcus and the twins had now stepped down from the aircraft, and were heading slowly toward the executive wing, drawn by curiosity neither could resist. Emma was the first to reach the door. She didn't open it, but she pressed her ear against the cool glass. She caught only fragments. Her grandmother's voice low and tight, Blackwood's deeper, laced with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief. And then she heard it, her father's name, spoken softly as if it still had the power to break them all. Emma stepped back, her stomach twisting. She didn't know what was in that envelope her grandmother was holding, but she knew, with the same certainty she'd had when fixing the jet, that it was meant for her and Olivia, and that it would change everything. Would you like me to go? Straight into part 7, so the final shocking reveal hits with maximum emotional and suspenseful impact. That's where all the threads, the promise, the envelope, and Blackwood's connection to James, finally explode into the open. The afternoon light slanted lower now, pouring through the hangar windows and long, golden bars that stretched across the tarmac. The Gulfstream's polished fuselage caught the glow, throwing shards of light across the concrete floor. Before Emma and Olivia Parker, the world outside had gone quiet. They stood just inside the threshold of the executive wing, their small frames half hidden behind the heavy door, watching their grandmother and William Blackwood as if staring into a scene they weren't supposed to see. Inside the office, the envelope lay on Blackwood's desk, no longer in Susan's bag. Somehow, in the tense minutes that had passed, it had been brought out again, and this time, the weight of it was different. It wasn't just a sealed letter. It was a fuse waiting for someone to strike the match. Susan's face was pale, but her eyes were steady. I should wait, she said, her voice quiet but certain. They're not ready. You're wrong, Blackwood replied. They were ready the moment they walked into that hangar and fixed a problem my entire crew couldn't solve. They're his daughters, Susan. Whether you like it or not, they're already stepping into the world he lived in. Emma and Olivia exchanged a glance. Their father again. Always just out of reach, a name, a face in photographs, Balafhe. Could still hear in dreams, but couldn't remember fully when they woke. Susan hesitated, her hand hovering over the envelope. If I open this, they'll ask questions I'm not ready to answer. Then be ready. Blackwood said simply, something in his tone, the quiet finality of it, seemed to settle over the room like a closing door. Susan's fingers found the flap, tore it open with a sound that seemed far too loud in the stillness. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, its creases deep, the ink slightly faded. She unfolded it slowly, her eyes scanning the page once, twice. Her breath caught. What is it? Blackwood asked, stepping closer. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "It's not just a letter, it's instructions." Blackwood frowned. "Instructions for what?" Susan looked up at him, her expression somewhere between disbelief and dread. "For claiming something James left behind." Blackwood's jaw tightened. "The company's shares." Susan's eyes narrowed. "You knew." "I suspected," he said, "before he enlisted. James and I co-founded a defense technology firm. When he shipped out, he transferred his shares to a blind trust. No one's been able to touch them, not even me. The letter, it must be the key to releasing them." Emma's small voice broke into the moment. "What's a share?" Both adults turned sharply. The twins stood in the doorway now, no longer hiding. Olivia's gaze was fixed on the letter. In her grandmother's hands, Susan exhaled, her shoulders sagging. "It's something that could make you very rich and very visible." Blackwood stepped forward, kneeling so he was eye level with them. His voice lost all of its corporate edge, dropping into something rawer. "Your father saved my life. I've been looking for you ever since, not because of the money, but because he made me promise to watch over you. That letter, it means you have a place in the company we built together, a place that's yours by right." Olivia frowned. "Why didn't you find us sooner?" His eyes flickered with something unspoken. "Someone made sure I couldn't." He glanced at Susan, but didn't press it. Emma's gaze moved to the letter. "Can we see it?" Susan hesitated. Blackwood didn't. "You can," he said, "but you have to understand, once you step into this, there's no going back. People will know who you are, and some of them won't like it." Emma reached out, her fingers brushing the paper. She felt its weight, not in grams, but in the way it seemed to hum with something bigger than herself. She looked at Olivia, and her sister gave a small nod. Susan's lips pressed together, but she placed the letter in Emma's hands. The twins read in silence. The words were simple, written in their father's steady script. "If you are holding this, it means you're ready to know the truth. You are stronger than you think, and the world will try to tell you otherwise. Don't let it. The company belongs to you as much as it ever did to me, and if William is there, trust him. He'll fight for you when I can't." Emma's throat tightened. Olivia blinked rapidly, trying not to cry. Blackwood's voice was quiet. "This changes everything," and it did. In that office, with the sound of jet engines rumbling faintly through the glass and the weight of their fathers, words in their hands, Emma and Olivia's lives shifted. They weren't just the granddaughters of a cleaner anymore. They were heirs to a legacy and to a promise made on a battlefield half a world away. For a long moment, none of them moved. Then Blackwood straightened, his expression sharpening. "We have a lot to discuss, and a lot of people to prepare for." Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the airfield. Somewhere in those shadows, unseen eyes might already have been watching, the kind of eyes that take notice. When fortunes and legacies change hands, the twins didn't know it yet, but fixing William Blackwood's plane had been the easiest part of their day. The hard part was about to begin.